I thought my beta disguise was perfect, until the pack leader suddenly recognized my scent. Chapter 1, The Scent That Broke the Lie. The moment Alpha Kael stopped in front of me in the Great Hall, I knew my 2-year lie had finally caught up with my heartbeat. I kept my eyes down, my beta posture perfect, as 40 warriors watched the pack leader make his way down the line of new recruits. He had never looked at me before. I was unremarkable. A healer's assistant. A quiet, scentless beta who kept to the edges. But tonight, Kael stopped. The air shifted. The torchlight threw his shadow across my chest, and I felt the weight of him before I saw the silver in his eyes. He was huge, all broad shoulders and coiled strength, the kind of alpha who could snap a spine with one hand and sign a treaty with the other. His black hair was tied back, and his jaw was shadowed with stubble. He wore no crown, but every wolf in the room lowered their gaze. "Your name," he said. My mouth went dry. "Rin, Alpha. I assist the healers." "You've been with Silverfang for 2 years." "Yes, Alpha." He leaned in. Not in the way an alpha assesses a subordinate, but in the way a predator tests the air for hidden prey. His nostrils flared. His eyes, silver-gray, narrowed. "You're not a beta," he said. The hall went silent. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I forced a confused frown. Of course I am, Alpha. My designation was tested at the border. Your designation was forged. His voice dropped, but it carried like a blade. Your scent. It's there, under the beta musk. Cinnamon and rain. Omega. The word hit the hall like a thunderclap. Warriors shifted. Someone hissed. I heard boots scrape as a couple of betas stepped back from me, as if my very presence might contaminate them. I opened my mouth to deny it, to laugh it off, to do anything. But Kael's hand shot out and caught my chin before I could speak. His fingers were warm, rough, and unbreakable. He tilted my head back, exposing my throat. I went rigid. Every instinct I had screamed at me to submit or fight, and I hated how my body trembled. He brought his nose to the curve of my neck and inhaled. I forgot how to breathe. "How long have you been hiding from me, little Omega?" he murmured, the words vibrating against my skin. 2 years under my roof. 2 years you've slept in my territory, eaten my food, and walked past my nose. Why? I could feel the heat of his mouth just above my scent gland. It was too much. The suppressants had thinned from stress, and his proximity was making it worse. My knees threatened to give. I grabbed his wrist, not to push him away, I wasn't strong enough, but to steady myself. I started. He pulled back just far enough to look into my eyes. His expression wasn't angry. It was something far more dangerous, satisfied. "You're coming with me." He released my chin, but before I could step back, his hand closed around my wrist and he pulled me out of the hall. I stumbled after him, half running to keep up with his long stride. The warriors parted like water. No one spoke. No one dared. "Alpha, please, I can explain," I tried. "Later." He dragged me down the stone corridor, past the common rooms, past the healer's ward where I'd spent 2 years building a false life. The door to his private quarters opened without a key, because he was Alpha, and the pack house recognized him. He shoved me inside and slammed the door. I backed away until my shoulders hit the wall. Kael didn't follow immediately. He stood by the door, arms crossed, staring at me like I was a puzzle he'd just solved. The room smelled like him, pine and leather and something warm. It made my head spin. "Take off the blockers," he ordered. "No." His eyebrow rose. "No?" I lifted my chin, even though my hands were shaking. "I'm not a threat to your pack. I've done nothing wrong." I'm a healer. I've saved lives. You have no right to. You've been lying to me since the day you crossed my border. He crossed the room in 3 steps. I pressed myself harder against the wall. That makes you a threat. So I'll ask again. Why are you here? I swallowed. I needed a home. Omegas. Don't lie to me again. He braced one hand on the wall beside my head, caging me in. The heat of his body was a wall I couldn't push through. I have been patient, Rin. I've watched you, waiting for you to trust me. But I'm done waiting. I looked up at him, and for the first time, I let the terror show. Are you going to kill me? Something flickered in his silver eyes. Hurt, maybe. Kill you? No, little Omega. I'm going to keep you. Before I could process that, he cupped the back of my neck and pulled my forehead to his. The touch was shockingly gentle. His thumb stroked over my racing pulse. Your scent is driving me insane, he whispered. Do you have any idea what it's like to finally breathe it in? I've been dreaming about it for 2 years, catching traces in the corridors, telling myself I was losing my mind. But you're real. My breath caught. You knew? I suspected. Every time you passed, I caught something under the blockers. I thought I was imagining it until tonight. Your stress made the blockers slip. And now. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply. Now I can't unknow it. I should have pushed him away. I should have denied everything. But my body had other ideas. My fingers curled into his shirt, and I swayed toward him, drawn by an invisible string. Tell me why you're here, he said, his lips brushing my temple. No more lies. I squeezed my eyes shut. The truth was a knife in my chest. I came to find out who killed my brother. Kael went still. He was an Omega too. His name was Elias. He was murdered by wolves from Silverfang 2 years ago. I came here to find proof, to find the ones responsible. I thought if I hid as a beta, I could get close. I never expected. I laughed bitterly. I never expected the Alpha to notice me. Kael pulled back, his face unreadable. Your brother. Elias Aldrich. My blood froze. How do you know his name? Because I killed him. The floor dropped out from under me. I tried to shove him away, but he caught my wrists and pinned them to the wall on either side of my head. I snarled, my Omega instincts finally giving way to grief and rage. Let me go. I'll kill you. I didn't kill him, Run. But I know who did. And I know why. His voice was steady, low, and it broke through my fury. He was my friend. I stopped struggling. My chest heaved. What? Elias Aldrich was my friend. He died in my arms. The wolf who killed him was my former beta, Dane. I executed him for it. But by then, Elias was gone, and I couldn't save him. I've been hunting the truth of what Dane was planning ever since. And now you walk into my pack, wearing his face, and I finally understand. Tears burned my eyes. I hadn't cried in years. You're lying. I'm not. He released one of my wrists and reached into his collar, pulling out a leather cord. On it hung a small silver ring, a ring I recognized, because it had been my brother's. I stared at it. How? Elias asked me to keep it safe. He said if anything ever happened to him, I should find his brother and give it back. I never found you. You disappeared. Kael's voice cracked, just slightly. And then you walked into my pack 2 years ago, and I thought I was seeing a ghost. The fight drained out of me. I slid down the wall, and Kael let me go. He knelt in front of me, close but not touching. I'm sorry, he said. I'm sorry I didn't protect him. I'm sorry I didn't find you sooner. I looked at him through the blur of tears. Why didn't you tell me? I wasn't sure. Ren is a common name. And you didn't smell like him, not at first. But I've suspected for months. I wanted you to come to me. I wanted you to trust me. He reached out and brushed a tear from my cheek. I never meant to expose you in front of the pack. I lost control. Why now? Why today? Because today the council ordered all Omegas in our territory to be registered. If I hadn't claimed you first, they would have taken you. His jaw tightened. I couldn't let that happen. I blinked. Claimed me? He held my gaze. I told you. I'm going to keep you. The heat returned, low in my belly. I was too exhausted to fight it. Kael leaned in, and I didn't move. He pressed his forehead to mine, and then, slowly, deliberately, he nuzzled against my jaw. The scrape of his stubble sent shivers down my spine. I'm not going to hurt you, he said. But you're not leaving my side until we figure out who's trying to start a war over Omegas. I closed my eyes. I don't trust you. I know. His lips brushed my cheek. But you will. Chapter 2, The Alpha's Claim. Kael didn't give me time to process. He stood and pulled me to my feet, his hand steady on my elbow. You're staying here tonight. Here? I looked around his quarters. In your room? Yes. He was already moving to a wardrobe, pulling out a shirt and sweatpants. The council's envoy arrives tomorrow. They'll want to question every Omega in the territory. If you're under my direct protection, they can't touch you. I can protect myself. He turned, and his expression softened. I know you can. But this isn't about strength, Run. It's about politics. An unregistered Omega in Silver Fang is a liability. As my claimed Omega, you're untouchable. The word claimed did something to my chest. I crossed my arms. I never agreed to be claimed. You will. He handed me the clothes. Or you'll be taken into custody, and I'll have to start a war to get you back. Your choice. I stared at him. He wasn't joking. Fine. I snatched the clothes. But I'm not sharing your bed. His lips twitched. We'll see. There was no lock on the bathroom door, but I changed quickly, scrubbing the worst of the day from my skin. The clothes smelled like him, pine and leather and alpha. I tried not to think about how much I liked it. When I came out, Kael was sitting on the edge of the bed, unlacing his boots. The room was warm, lit by a single lamp. He had removed his shirt, revealing a torso carved from stone and crisscrossed with scars. I averted my eyes. The bed is big enough for two, he said without looking up. I'll sleep on the floor. He sighed. Run. I won't touch you unless you want me to. But if you sleep on the floor, I will lie on the floor next to you, and then we'll both be miserable. Why do you care? He lifted his head, and the silver of his eyes caught the light. Because you're my mate. The word hit me like a physical blow. My legs nearly gave out. I'm not. You are. He stood and walked toward me, slow and deliberate. I knew at the moment I smelled you tonight. The bond snapped into place. That's why I couldn't control myself in the hall. That's why I had to get you out of there before I did something reckless. I backed up until my spine hit the wall. He kept coming until there was no space between us. He didn't touch me, but his body was a breath away, and I could feel the heat radiating off him. Your brother was my friend, he said quietly. But you are my future. I've waited 2 years for you to stop hiding. I can wait a little longer for you to accept it. I swallowed. What if I never accept it? Then I'll spend the rest of my life trying to change your mind. He lifted a hand and brushed a strand of hair from my forehead. But I won't force you. Not ever. I should have been terrified. I should have been furious. But all I felt was an overwhelming sense of safety, wrapped in the scent of an alpha I'd spent 2 years avoiding. Without thinking, I leaned into his touch. His fingers stilled. Run. Don't make me regret this, I whispered. He didn't answer. He just wrapped his arms around me and pulled me against his chest. I was stiff for a second, then something inside me cracked. I buried my face in his shoulder and let him hold me. His hand came up to cradle the back of my head, and his lips pressed to my hair. I've got you, he said. I've got you. We stood like that for a long time. Eventually, he guided me to the bed. I didn't fight him when he pulled back the covers and eased me onto the mattress. He lay down beside me, keeping a few inches of space between us. But as the night deepened, I found myself shifting closer. My body craved his warmth. Kael remained still, but when my hand accidentally brushed his, he turned his palm over and linked our fingers. Sleep, he said. I'll keep watch. I wanted to tell him I didn't need protection. But my eyes were already closing, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt safe enough to sleep. Chapter 3, Forced Proximity. I woke to the sensation of a warm body pressed against my back. For one disorienting moment, I thought I was dreaming. Then I felt the slow rise and fall of Kael's chest, the weight of his arm draped over my waist, and the soft puff of his breath against my neck. I should have moved. I didn't. Are you awake? His voice was rough with sleep. Yes. Good. His arm tightened slightly, pulling me closer. Because I need to tell you something before the council arrives. I turned in his arms to face him. He was so close that I could count the flecks of gray in his eyes. What? The council isn't just here to register omegas. They're here because someone has been trafficking omegas across pack borders. Dane was involved before I killed him. He wasn't working alone. I frowned. And you think they're after me? I think they're after every unclaimed omega they can get their hands on. And you're not just any omega. You're an Aldrich. Your family has alpha blood. Your scent is potent. His hand found mine under the covers. Dane's allies will see you as a prize. I shivered. So I'm a target. You're my target. He said it without a hint of humor. Which means I'm not letting you out of my sight. Kael. Don't argue with me. He sat up, and the covers pooled around his waist. I forced myself to look at his face. I know you've been training secretly with the warriors. You're not helpless. But this isn't a fight you can win alone. I glared at him. How do you know about that? I'm the Alpha. I know everything that happens in my territory. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood. But I also know you've been hiding your true abilities. That ends today. If you're going to fight, I'll train you myself. I blinked. What? He turned and looked at me. You heard me. Get dressed. We have 2 hours before the council arrives. 2 hours later, I was sweating and breathless in the pack's private training yard. Kael had been relentless, testing my speed, my reflexes, and my ability to fight dirty. He was faster than me, stronger, but he never used his full strength. He blocked, countered, and every time I landed a hit, he smiled. Again, he said. I lunged at him, and he caught my wrist, spun me around, and pinned my back to his chest. His arm wrapped around my waist, holding me flush against him. Your footing is too narrow, he murmured in my ear. You're easy to unbalance. I shivered, but I wasn't sure if it was from the exertion or his proximity. I noticed. He laughed softly, the sound vibrating through his chest. Then he released me, and I stumbled forward. Again. By the time the council arrived, I was bruised and exhausted, but something in me had shifted. Kael had treated me not as a fragile Omega, but as a fighter. And I liked it. The council envoy was a tall, thin Alpha named Marcus Hale. His eyes swept over me with undisguised interest when Kael introduced me as his claimed Omega. Claimed? Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. That was quick, Alpha Kael. Especially for an Omega who's been hiding in your pack for 2 years. Kael's hand settled on the small of my back, a gesture of possession. He's mine. That's all you need to know. Marcus's gaze lingered on me for a moment too long. Of course. But I'll need to verify his designation. For the records. No. The word was absolute. Marcus's smile faltered. Alpha. I said no. Kael stepped forward, putting himself between me and the envoy. You have no jurisdiction over my mate. If you want to question him, you can do it through me. Marcus's eyes narrowed. This could be seen as obstruction. Take it up with the High Council. Kael's voice dropped. But if you try to touch him, I'll rip your throat out. The threat hung in the air. Marcus paled. Very well. I'll report your claim. He turned and left, but not before shooting me a look that made my blood run cold. When we were alone, Kael turned to me. You're not leaving my side. I didn't argue. That night, we sat across from each other in his quarters, eating in silence. The day had been long, and I was still processing everything. Finally, I spoke. Why are you doing this? Why protect me? He set down his fork. Because you're my mate. Because I promised your brother I'd keep you safe. Because I've spent 2 years watching you, and I can't stand the thought of anyone hurting you. He paused. Do I need a better reason? I looked away. I don't know how to do this. I've been alone since Elias died. I don't know how to let someone in. Kael reached across the table and took my hand. His thumb traced circles over my knuckles. Then let me show you. I didn't pull away. Chapter 4, Unraveling Secrets. The next few days were a blur of training, council meetings, and stolen moments. Kael was true to his word, he never pushed for more than I was ready to give, but he was always there, always touching me in small ways. A hand on my shoulder, a brush of fingers when he passed me a cup, the warmth of his thigh against mine when we sat side by side. The pack was wary at first. Omegas were rare, and many had never seen one. But Kael's claim was absolute, and the warriors soon accepted me as part of their inner circle. Some even began to train with me, respecting my speed and cunning. But the threat Marcus had hinted at was never far from my mind. I started digging into the records Kael kept in his study, searching for any mention of Dane's allies. One evening, I found it. Kael. I called, my voice sharp. He was at my side in seconds. What is it? I held up a faded letter. Dane was corresponding with someone outside the pack. Someone named M. They were planning to sell Omegas to a group of rogue Alphas. Elias found out, and Dane killed him to keep him quiet. Kael's jaw tightened. Does the letter say where they're meeting? No. But it mentions a place called the Hollow. Do you know it? His face went pale. It's a neutral territory. A black market for omega-trafficking. I've heard rumors, but I could never confirm it. He took the letter from my hands. If Marcus is involved, he'll be there. When? Every full moon. Which is in 3 days. He looked at me. We're going. I nodded. I'm going with you. No. I stood, crossing the room to stand in front of him. Kael, I'm not letting you go alone. This is my fight too. Elias was my brother. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he reached out and cupped my face, his thumb brushing over my cheekbone. I can't lose you too. You won't. I covered his hand with my own. We do this together. He kissed me then. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate and hungry, a claim and a promise all at once. His lips were warm and firm, and I melted into him, my hands fisting in his shirt. He pulled me closer, one arm around my waist, the other tangling in my hair. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. Together, he said. I nodded. Together. Chapter 5, The Rivals Challenge. The hollow was a sprawling underground network of tunnels and caverns, lit by flickering torches. Kael and I moved through the shadows, following the scent of too many alphas and the faint, terrified notes of omegas. We found Marcus in a central chamber, surrounded by guards. Rows of caged omegas lined the walls. My stomach turned. Kael's hand found mine. Stay behind me. Not a chance. We fought our way through the guards. Kael was a blur of violence, his alpha strength unmatched. I used my speed to dart between opponents, using the techniques he'd taught me. It was brutal and exhausting, but we moved as a unit, covering each other's backs. When we reached Marcus, he laughed. You brought the Omega to a den of wolves. How romantic. Kael snarled. Let them go. Or what? Marcus's eyes gleamed. You'll kill me? The High Council will hear of this. You'll be stripped of your title. I don't care about the title. I care about justice. Kael's voice was ice. You murdered innocent people. You enslaved Omegas. You killed my friend. Marcus's gaze flicked to me. And now you've brought me his brother. Sentimental. I stepped forward. You killed my brother. I ordered it. Marcus smiled. Dane was supposed to kill you too, but you were too clever. Hiding as a beta. Did you really think you could escape me? Rage surged through me. I lunged, but Kael caught my arm. Wait. Marcus laughed again. What's the matter, Alpha? Afraid your little Omega will get hurt? Kael released me. No. I'm afraid I won't be able to stop him from killing you. He was right. Before Marcus could react, I moved. I'd spent 2 years learning to fight like a beta, dirty, fast, and unexpected. I disarmed Marcus, drove my knee into his gut, and pinned him to the ground with his own knife at his throat. Where are the others? I demanded. Marcus wheezed. You'll never find them all. Then I'll start with you. Kael's hand landed on my shoulder. Run. We need him alive for the council. I was shaking with rage. But Kael's touch anchored me. I looked at the caged Omegas, at the fear in their eyes, and I made myself lower the knife. Fine. We freed the Omegas and bound Marcus. As we led them out of the hollow, Kael kept his arm around me, his body a shield. You did good, he said quietly. I leaned into him. So did you. Chapter 6, The Truth of the Past. Back in Silver Fang, the pack rallied around us. The Omegas we'd rescued were given sanctuary, and Marcus was handed over to the High Council with the evidence we'd gathered. But the victory felt hollow. Elias was still gone. And I was still carrying the weight of 2 years of lies. One night, I found myself alone on the balcony, staring at the moon. Kael joined me, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. Can't sleep? He asked. No. He stood behind me, his arms around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. Talk to me. I closed my eyes. I spent 2 years hating you. I came here ready to destroy you. And now? And now? Now I don't know who I am without the hate. Kael turned me to face him. You're Renaldric. You're an Omega. You're a healer, a fighter, a brother, and a survivor. And you're my mate. He cupped my face in his hands. You don't have to be defined by what happened to you. I blinked back tears. What if I'm not enough? He kissed my forehead. You're everything. We stood there, wrapped in each other, until the first light of dawn broke over the mountains. Chapter 7, Bond and Acceptance. The full moon rose over Silver Fong, and the pack gathered for the bonding ceremony. Kael had insisted it be done properly, not as a political move, but as a declaration of our choice. I stood before him in the center of the circle, surrounded by the pack. I wore no finery, just simple clothes. But Kael looked at me as if I were the most precious thing in the world. Do you, Renaldric, accept me as your alpha and your mate? He asked, his voice steady. I do. He lifted his hand to my neck, fingers brushing over my scent gland. May I mark you? My heart raced. Yes. He leaned in, and his lips pressed to my neck. I felt the sharp, sweet pressure of his teeth, and then a warmth that spread through my entire body. It wasn't pain. It was belonging. I marked him too, my Omega instincts guiding me. And when we pulled back, the pack erupted in howls of joy. Kael pulled me into his arms and kissed me deeply, and I finally understood what it meant to be home. Epilogue, Mated and Unmasked. 1 year later, I stood on the balcony of our quarters, watching the pack below. Kael came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. How are you feeling? He asked. Tired. But happy. He kissed my shoulder. The healer said the pup is healthy. I smiled, leaning back against him. Our pup. Our pup. He rested his hand on my stomach, over the small swell that was just beginning to show. I never thought I'd have this. Me neither. I turned in his arms to face him. But I'm glad I stopped hiding. He kissed me softly. I'm glad I followed your scent.